Hey ladies, welcome to another episode of Revitalized Womanhood. Today I am joined with the beautiful Jen Hurst, and I am so excited to have her here with me. I was introduced to Jen through a mutual friend, Trina, who was also brought to me through the universe, through this person, you need to meet this person, and it has been so fortuitous for me because it all happened. Jen, the way it all happened was exactly when I was like manifesting that I wanted those people in my life. Do you know that is the weirdest thing, that when I was sitting talking with Lisa about coming and doing this retreat, and I was kind of talking to her about things, she's like, oh, you need to meet my friend Trina. And so then I'm like, okay, I got into that and I meet Trina and I'm like, oh yeah, I love you. And then I start telling her that I'm really, really, really interested in my journey right now to learn about the Enneagrams. And she's like, oh, well then you need to meet my friend Jen. Here we go. Introducing Jen Hurst. Welcome. Would you please introduce yourself to my listeners?
Sure. I'm so happy to be here. So, yes, my name is Jen Hurst, and I am an Enneagram consultant and coach. I do work around personality studies, and sometimes people are like, well, what is that? And who comes to see you? And it's basically the same type of people that are looking for therapist or therapy or coaching. They're often that tribe of people that are looking to understand their patterns and what they do and why. And often it comes through the lens of, I actually want to be in relationship with the other, quote, the other. Sometimes that's a partner or their family members. They want to be in relationship in a different way. And so they come into the Enneagram wanting to understand their own patterns and their own way of being. And so that's what I do. I do a lot of trauma-informed work as well. I have special training in trauma studies, and I'm working with Dr. Gabor Mate presently in a course to increase my ability to help people with trauma. So that's a unique lens and nuance to some of the work that I do, but that's really the essence.
Now, are you an original Utah mama? I know you
No.
went to Texas. So is that where
Yeah.
you originate from, is Texas?
No, actually, I was born in North Vancouver, BC, so
Oh,
I'm not even technically an American, although I am. I have dual citizenship, and moved to the States when I was young, and then moved around a whole lot. We are in St. George right now, but we were previously in Austin, Texas. So, yeah, we have seven children, ranging from almost 25 down to 9, and we've got one grandbaby and another grandbaby on the way in April. So I've got 3 married that are grown and 4 at home.
and they're all boys except one, right?
That's right. That's right. 6 boys.
Oh my
One
heck.
daughter
You
right in the
are
middle.
the boy mama extravaganza. I have 3 and I keep explaining to my kids, they're like, Mom, we want a sister. And I'm like, that's not quite how it works. Let me get some ladies on the phone. They'll tell you. 6 boys later, right? There's a mom up in Montana that I follow on Instagram, and I think they just got their birth announcement for their 9th baby, and it's 9 boys.
Wow.
I'm like, oh,
Wow.
okay, maybe
Yeah.
let's not go there. Big,
Yep.
beautiful, happy
You don't
family.
get to choose. That's for
Nope,
sure. You just
nope,
get
for
what you get.
sure. So the reason that I went looking and why I am on this journey for the Enneagram is because it became very clear to me when I started this women's community and when I started to meet my members and you said it beautifully on one of your other podcasts you were on, actually, it was perfect. People are not versions of me. And I obviously I didn't assume that. Obviously I know that other people are other people. However, you kind of think that you can treat people in a way that you would be okay being treated, right? And so I've got these new women, and these women are not like me at all. They are not outgoing. Would not walk up to a stranger on the street, would not, you know what I mean? And so for me to even communicate with them in a way that I want to communicate with them, where they feel completely heard and safe and loved, is not how I would expect to be communicated to. And that's what set me on my path of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we had a conversation about, because I am totally a noob to the Enneagram, and I love how you explain the history of it, like where it kind of comes from.
Yeah, so the Enneagram has been around a really long time. Some will say it's the oldest typology that we know of. Comes from lots of different traditions. We really don't know the exact orientation of the Enneagram and where it originated from, but we do know that there are traces of different traditions, kind of religious traditions, if you will, even though the Enneagram is not a religious uh, typology. In fact, that's often a myth that people will look it up online and they'll see a lot of non-denominational churches using the Enneagram as part of their curriculum, which I think is really an amazing attribute, and I more power to them because I feel like it's a really amazing system of understanding our patterns in the human experience, and it lays over any religion. Prior to modern psychology, which is really only a little over 200 years old, there wasn't therapists. There were, you know, monks and um, different people of that sorts that people would come to help solve their problems. And relationship issues aren't unique to our generation. I mean, this has been an issue for as long as we've had other people to associate with. We're a communal species. And so in their tribes, there were people that would help them unsolve their relational mysteries and being in relationship with self. And that was really where the Enneagram became so useful for people, as it helped people to come into relationship with themselves. So it was introduced in the 70s in Berkeley, and then it was really translated into a written tradition, which we now have, and it's been taken off all over the world, and it's been used in many, many different circles. Some people will call it a psycho-spiritual tool, which in some respect I really do appreciate, because we're talking about an essence here. I mean, this is sort of where the Enneagram is different than other typologies, is that, and you might have heard me already say this, so I'll say it again, that for instance, Myers-Briggs is a really beautiful system, and it's used in corporate America prolifically. But then Myers-Briggs describes the human experience from the perspective of the other person. So how do other people experience you? And that's really, really useful. The Enneagram describes how the lived experience is from our inner essence, from our perspective. What is it like for me to be me? And the Enneagram is the only system that I know of that speaks to that. So when the Enneagram, really became useful for people was when it really became this essential tool of illuminating this inner essence. So we use the word personality as a really general term. Personality, the Greek translation for that is actually a mask, or it kind of became a more liberal definition later as maybe a character, a condition or state or capacity of the human. So personality is something that actually is an adaptation to our early environments. It isn't really who we are. So when people say, oh, the Enneagram is this really great personality test, well, I mean, kind of. It does speak to this mask that is an adaptation. But what it's really talking to is that inner essence, that there is a pattern, there is an archetype within us that we come born with. It's innate. It is part of who we are. You couldn't dissect it from you. You couldn't transplant it with another type of person. And honestly, the Enneagram is the only system that I know of that can speak specifically to that. So that's kind of the basics of the Enneagram and how it evolved and why it's useful to people in our day.
That goes way deeper than what I assumed. I assumed like we get off this James Clear Atomic Habits and you can change, right? I mean, essentially you can change, adjust, pivot, and become a different version of yourself. I mean, yes, you are yourself, but I didn't think it went even deeper than that. So that's really interesting.
Yeah, so that's a question that people ask is, well, I'm different. And so I definitely am a different type of person now. My personality has changed, and absolutely our personality, the mask changes, but it's still within your type structure. And the layers of the Enneagram go so deep, and that's honestly kind of a deterrent for some people, is that, pardon me, is that it is so nuanced. There are so many aspects of the Enneagram that until you really embody the system, you have a hard time recognizing it. I mean, I remember when I first purchased my very first Enneagram book. It was the Wisdom of the Enneagram by Riso and Hudson, and it was it was all numbers, and I'm like, what are these numbers? They didn't mean anything to me. I didn't really grasp what that meant, and the diagram and the lines and what did it all mean. And it took time of really understanding what this diagram is. It's way more than a symbol. If you know that, do you know what the Enneagram looks like? It's a circle that has 9 points around it. Ennea stands for 9, and gram stands for diagram or something drawn. So that diagram is really essential, and it explains a great deal of the nuance of the type. So when people say they've changed, what they're describing to me is how they're resourcing across the Enneagram. They're moving the lines. They're resourcing to their stress number. They're resourcing to their security number. They're actually adapting within their type structure for better or for worse. And so in that respect, yes, we have so much neuroflexibility in that aspect. We can change and adapt and get better or worse. And, speaking to this in a different angle is sometimes people will say, well, I'm more than one type. I did a test and I have, 3 or 4 that were basically equal. And so I'm going to just dismiss the Enneagram altogether because I can't discover my type. And to me, as a professional in this space, I would say that's a really fantastic clue that you're actually quite neuroflexible. You are able to resource. You don't recognize that that's what you're doing, but every type structure will play out a certain type of movement in stress and insecurity that is actually really, really predictable. Now, of course, the way you do it might look a little different than another person because your instincts might be different, but either way, you're still resourcing to something that your type it organically doesn't have and needs in another type. And that is why sometimes people will take a test and then they'll be tied between 2 numbers. Well, it's because they're resourcing quite heavily. And if they just look a little deeper, they'll usually begin to see that pattern emerge.
I have to write this down or else I'll never come back to this, because what you're saying to me is that what makes us drawn to our partner? What makes us drawn to the other person is because we're sourcing from what maybe if they are a 2 and I am a 7 or whatever. I don't know the numbers. I don't know them well enough to say that, but is it something inside me that's being drawn to or the need for that other number that makes that connection? Like kind of goes into the yin and yang, but is that something that's a philosophy in the Enneagram?
That's a good question. There's a lot of reasons why we choose our partners. And in an ideal world, I would probably say that that's not the purpose of the Enneagram, because what we really want in this space is to have authentic individuation, to be really differentiated from one another. And so if we're resourcing in a partner's strength or security or attribute, then we're really not in our own essence. We're really not being accountable for ourselves. And so as people will sometimes ask me, what are the most compatible types? And the answer to that is always maturity. Anybody can be compatible with the other person if they are mature. And one way to look at maturity in the Enneagram is the levels of health. And most of us are somewhere between average to healthy, average to unhealthy in that space. But because of life circumstances, for instance, if you were a type 9, you might really resource to a type 6 quite heavily because you've spent a great deal of your life in stress. Or perhaps your childhood had a substantial amount of trauma involved. And so you as a child had to learn to adapt. And so that 9 might look a little bit like a 6. The question would be, are you doing 9 things for the reasons 9s do them? Or are you doing 9 things for the reasons 6 do them? Because 6 and 9 share a line. And so that movement back and forth can be a really profound clue. And then that might make you more interested in a partner who is presenting a different quality that perhaps you lack. And, that's a beautiful attribute of being in relationship with people, but it should not ever be the main source of wanting to understand the Enneagram is, so how can my partner fill in for me? Or you know, how can I adapt even more to become compatible to this person? We really want more accountability in each person, to really recognize their own patterns and to be fully responsible, fully individuated, and differentiated from their partners, because then we can absolutely celebrate each other's strengths and each other's, neural flexibility, so to speak. We can really celebrate our differences in that respect when we're authentically able to own our own qualities.
I
Does
love
that make
that you,
sense?
oh my gosh, it made so much sense. Like, actually blew my mind that you said it so beautifully, because women have a hard time asking for what they want already. It doesn't matter what Enneagram you are. It doesn't matter what personality. Women, I feel like, well, I guess that's not true. I guess you have some that are like, no, this is what I want. And this is how it needs to be done. But I find the majority, I guess I should say, is, I call them chameleons. And so it's funny when you started talking about the 3 as the shapeshifter, because I had a term for that already from growing up and knowing different women who would do this. They would become these chameleons with these new boyfriends, or they would become this chameleon in this lifestyle that they were in. And then they would be a totally different person in another one. And so I was really fascinated when you actually said that that's a type 3, that they are considered kind of a shapeshifter like that. But I love that we can't go, you said this in one of your episodes, we can't go deep with people if we can't go deep with ourselves. And that is 100% what I'm trying to help these women. Like, we're starting our 90-day focus firing this month, which is basically our 90 days of goals. And we have our 4 core categories: beliefs, bonds, body, biz. And basically, when they all first started, and even when I started, I'll say that. I'll use me as an example. When I first started, I wrote this email series. It's called the 4 Weeks to a Fresh Start. That's basically my free email series on my website that I want women to go to, because it's kind of like baby steps into setting goals, right? It's first have a vision, and this is how you have a vision, and this is what your vision needs to be clearly defined from an emotion, from whatever. It kind of guides them through that. And when I was doing it for myself, I even was like, I don't know, what does that mean? Let me think about what that means for my family, and let me think about what that means for my husband, and wait a minute. And so I could break through it enough so now when women are doing it and I hear them doing these things, well, let me ask my husband about that. And I'm like, wait, what? No. What are you? What is your goal? What is your vision? It has nothing to do with anyone else. They may be part of it, but as far as what are you wanting for you? And so having you explain the Enneagram about it just being understanding ourselves and not as a way to, yes, I guess it will help you communicate with another number better because you are more secure in yourself and you see where you are triggered or where you are flying off the handle, right? Mm-hmm. I love this. You've just made me love this even more and want to dive even deeper into this because it is all about ourselves. I actually named 2023, I've named it already, 2023 focusing on me, right? It's not selfish, it's self-full. It's like the oxygen mask. Why do we put it on ourselves first? Because you can't help anyone when you're dead, right? So it has to start with us.
Absolutely.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So
really
excited.
Does. And it's really, the new or the layer, I consider it to be another nuance that goes on top of our type structure is the feminine and the masculine. And it's a whole conversation. Like that's a whole thing. I mean, we could go through all the 9 types and discuss what the challenge is for the feminine, male or female, and what the challenge is for the masculine, male or female. There are some types that are inherently more rewarded in our culture. The type 2 female is absolutely the most rewarded in our culture and society. And that can be really difficult if you're not a type 2 or a type 9. Type 9s are the peacemakers, that just kind of placate, that go along to get along. Those are very heavily rewarded in a sort of patriarchal community. So what I find to be difficult are women that come in and see me and are being coached that fall into a particular type that isn't rewarded very heavily in our culture, like the type 8. The female type 8 is by far the strongest. The type 8 is generally the most aggressive of all the types. And so they come in with some shame about who they are. Like they're supposed to be some different version of themselves, and they're absolutely competing with this inner essence of them that feels the need to be a leader, that feels the need to sort of combat or go against the other. It's just an innate aspect of them, and it comes with a cost. And so to really be able to unpack that and make an allowance to allow a befriending process of this true essence of them. There's nothing wrong with any of us. It really is, what is our relationship with ourselves, and how are we in relationship with ourselves, and changing the narrative that we have between who we think we are, quote unquote, supposed to be, what version of us was rewarded, and what version of us has been sort of a victim to an unaware, uninformed society. So there's a particular book that I really love to refer, since your audience is women, for those that are particularly strong and are good advocates for themselves. There's a book called The Dance of Anger by Harriet Lerner that really is a beautiful book for strong, aggressive, assertive type women. That would be one of my recommendations. So it's an interesting, female, male, and the stereotypes that go along with those gender roles is a layer of the Enneagram that is very, very specific for each type. I remember speaking once at an event, and there was a gentleman talking before me, and he kept saying that all men are afraid of failure. All men are afraid of failure. And I was just like, gosh, that's not true. Not all men are afraid of failure. Some men are afraid of confrontation. Some men are afraid of suffering. Some men are afraid of being incompetent. I could go through all 9 types and tell you what the core fear is. And I promise you, it is not all men are afraid of failure. Now, our society and culture might predispose that onto men, that their primary role is to be a success and to succeed. But down underneath that, sort of cultural narrative is something much, much more personal than all men are afraid of failure. So that's sort of a stereotype that I don't believe in, and I don't believe is useful and helpful for men. And I actually have a really broad demographic of men in my practice, which is kind of an unusual thing, because typically speaking, women are the ones that go into therapy first. That's the
and they
anyway.
drag the husband along, or he sits with his arms folded and doesn't want to be there, or
yeah, and I don't like that. I don't think that's fair either. I think that there are actually a lot of willing men that would like to go and that are actually quite eager to participate in this process. So I really invite that a lot into my practice.
I love that. So I love so many different places I could go here. So back to what you were saying, being ashamed of we talked about this. You and I talked about this. So I did one of those tests online that was just, okay, well, I will see what number I am, and it said I was a 3, the achiever. And that sounds good, right? And then I read it, and it says 3s are defined by their desire to achieve. They want to advance in the world and will sacrifice almost anything for success, vigorously pursuing tasks and becoming utterly absorbed in the pursuit of attainment. But they will only choose a task in the first place if it promises rewards and brings prestige. And I was like, nope, I don't want that. That's not me. That sounds horrible. That's not me, right? And maybe some of it is, obviously, because I took a test and I did some things. But when I read that, I was like, that sounds horrible. If anyone read that about me, they would think that I'm this cold-hearted, like I only think of success and not people. And I'm like, I'm not a 3. I'm not a 3, guys. Don't worry. And someone that knew a little bit more about it said, okay, well, now go read the descriptions of each. Don't, just ignore that. Just now go read the descriptions of each. And I'm a 7 if I do that, right? So if I read the description of a 7, I'm like, okay, I feel like that's more me. But then when you were just talking about, not just talking, but when you were talking about you being a 2 and some of the things that your characteristics of a 2, I was like, well, that's me too. So I'm really, really excited to work more into this with you because I feel like I am all over the place. And when I did take my very first test, it did show that I was almost the exact same pie size, almost the exact same pie size in about three different numbers. And I was like, so well, that's weird.
That's actually really not unusual. That's quite common. And what I'll say about testing is that it is a really inefficient way of discovering your type. And there's some reasons for that. Testing is designed to analyze behavior. It's looking at how other people experience you. And it takes a certain amount of self-knowledge, I guess. It takes a certain amount of self-awareness to be able to take a test like this to begin with. But that's the motivation for wanting to take the test, is they're wanting to learn about who they are. So there's a little bit of a dichotomy there. So when you take a test, it does open an opportunity for introspection. And sometimes, for many people, they really are struggling to understand themselves. And so they're looking for answers. And tests are sort of set up to trick you. And this is why working with a professional can really be advantageous, is when you're given a scenario and a test and you have to choose between 2 similar things, you might say, well, I'm actually both of those things. And in a live consultation or through Enneagram coaching, you have the opportunity for someone like me to say, well, when are you like this? And what does this feel like for you when you have that experience? And then we'll go to the other adjective and we can discuss, well, what does that feel like when you do this, or when you choose that, or when this happens to you? There's so much more to who you are than just this adjective that some test has determined. And so, is testing very accurate? Not really, but it will usually get you close. And so when you describe that you're kind of have some 3 qualities and have some 7 qualities, those are actual lookalikes, the 7 and the 3, and for pretty clear reasons. But my question to you would be to really look at number one, what is the core motive for each type, to really discuss and with yourself, really look deeply at what that is, and then what each type resources to in stress and insecurity. Does the 3 resources to 9 and to 6, and the 7 resources to 1 and to 5. Really observe yourself deeply and determine which of those strategies do you play out in your life the most. That would be my first recommendation. And then to very much hold testing lightly. Take the data. People will say, oh, well, I took a test and it told me I'm this, so this is what I am. And I'm like, well, hold on, just hold that lightly. Do some discovery. When you go through all 9 types, you will absolutely discover that you have an aspect or an element of more than one. You will have a little bit of all of them in you. And that's really the utility of the circle. What it represents is that you have a little bit of all of these types. And you also have a little bit of every one of these motives and core fears, but you're mostly oriented towards one. And once you really get to know your pattern, what you do, why you do it, you'll begin to see that it's predictable. It will play out every time. When I am in stress, I go right into my body and I start moving. It's just like clockwork. And that's how my body resources in stress as a type 2 that moves to type 8. You'll just begin to recognize that there are some intuitive patterns associated with who you are that you've done probably your entire life. And in one respect, you adapted in one way, and another respect, you adapted in another. And so the 3 and the 7 are very similar in the feeling. They're both in the assertive stance, so they tend to go against the other. When they move into a room, they are immediately observing what's happening and what do I need to be assertive in? What do I need to move into? And that's a very energetic property of the 7 and the 3. So yeah, and they both are a lot of fun. They're both very energetic, high energetic quality to both types, and both are generally quite successful. So ambitious. I mean, there's a lot of overlays. And so, you spoke to something about not liking what you read. That's a real important clue as well, is when you begin to do some discovery and you feel like you're on to something, and then there's something about what you're reading that kind of hurts. That's like, oh, I don't like that. I'm a little bit exposed. It feels like it stings on the inside a little bit, and that's a really great sign that you're onto something. I mean, I read about the 2s sometimes, or even when I'm consulting with people, I have to, sometimes when their type structure is similar to mine, I have to watch my own bias and my own prejudice, my own lived experience, because I'm seeing it mirrored back to me, for better or for worse. And so that's just part of being human. That's part of being part of this collective tribe of humans in relationship, is we're all just a little bit like each other, but we are not the same as. People are not versions of us. And that's why learning about the Enneagram is really just such a powerful tool.
I agree. Wow. So in my situation where I am going into it, actually, I wasn't when I started. I thought, oh, hey, if I learn my Enneagram and know how to learn their Enneagrams, I will know how to speak to them better. That's kind of what my original thinking was, where it's not necessarily wrong, right? But maybe if I know more about myself and I'm strong enough in myself, the way that I can speak to them is not how I normally would, because I can be comfortable taking criticism. I can be comfortable knowing that I'm not the right way and it needs to be different. So it's a little bit similar, but it's a little different. It's once like you said, maturity is the key.
Exactly. And I think that you're approaching it in a really fair way, that once you understand your own stuff, you can approach other people coming from a place of health. You've chosen, there's a term in the Enneagram called conscious conduct. You're able to be very conscious and aware and in the present moment about what's reactive in your body. And you can own that. You can be accountable for that. But if you know that your partner is a type 8, there's a really great quote that says, as a type 8, they want you to stab them in the front. Like, they don't want to be stabbed in the back. Just tell them like it is. Like, stab them in the front. You can be very direct with a type 8. They almost enjoy a little confrontation. They enjoy a little energetic friction between. I mean, you can really tell the truth to a type 8. But if you're working with a type 9, and let's say you're in a business organization or in some type of community or auxiliary, you are working with someone, you can't use that same strategy with a 9. So if, the Enneagram has been said that it is an individual process of learning the Enneagram, but it must be done in community, if that makes sense. So community work in the Enneagram is really, really powerful. You're able to learn so much from one another about what it is like to be them. In fact, some of the best online videos for educational purposes of the Enneagram are done in panels. And so if anyone wants to learn about their type, I would suggest searching up their type as a panel and then listen to what it's like from a group of type 9s or type 1s or whatever the type is. You'll really learn and get a sense of the type. So it's absolutely a powerful tool to be used in community. That's really one of the underlying purposes of the Enneagram, but you have to do your work first, is really what I guess I was trying to say.
Yeah. So I don't know if I know how to ask this right, so bear with me. So when you go into another number and like I see these and I'm like, ew, no, I don't want that, right? Is that discomfort because it's not me? Or is that discomfort because it is me and I don't want to recognize it? Because there are some things in there that I'm like, no, that's not there. I cannot be in this position. This is basically a nonprofit right now. You know what I mean? It's a business, but it's basically a passion project right now and I'm okay with that. And I love that. And I'm lucky enough that it can be that way. My poor husband, bless his heart. But I look at it and I'm like, maybe there is some truth to this though. Right. And I don't know because I haven't explored it anymore because I literally set it down and said, nope, don't like it, hate it. That's not me. Moving on. Yeah. I want to find something else that I sent. And that's like you were talking about how it's because, and I think, and I guess you're right. I don't want to say this just about women, but I do think that I am in a women's community. So I think that we are rewarded for being a specific number. So is the 2 more of like a people pleaser? Is that a common place for a 2? And a nurturer, homemakery vibe? Yes, obviously, absolutely. Because that's what is rewarded for women in our culture.
Yeah. The 2 is what's called the giver, the lover, the nurturer. They are very self-sacrificing. They're very unattuned to their own needs. Now, you could say that that's true about all women, that they're unattuned to their needs, but only on the surface. Yeah. If you were to do, any amount of introspective work, and if somebody is truly individuated, then they would actually know what their needs are. So on the surface, you might see a group of women and they might all say that none of them know how to advocate for themselves. But I'm guessing that there's a fair amount that actually do, and it might come out sideways, because of our cultural overlay. Sometimes when we read about our type and we don't like what we're reading, it could be that it's speaking to the shadow side of who we are, and that is activating, is the term that I use, is it's activating for us. It's like there's this energetic sting, like, ooh, but it also could be that maybe that's what you're recognizing in a relationship of yours that was difficult, perhaps the relationship with your mother or your father or a sibling or your spouse. So it could be highlighting an attribute that you're closely associated with, from a behavioral standpoint. So there's no real clear answer to that, except I would be curious to understand why there's activation and to stay with that, to be very present to that activation within you. When you feel that, ooh, there's some energy here about this type that it's either speaking to a lot of truth within me, or my ego is in defense to it. I'm contending against it because I'm being confronted. That's absolutely something that we work with in the Enneagram all the time, is self-confronting.
I talk about it as labels and using them as a shield to not do the hard work, to not be uncomfortable, to not put yourself in situations. So when women come in here and I have to preface, obviously, I'm not a therapist. Obviously, I don't know if you've been diagnosed. I don't do that work, right? But when I do meet a woman that says, oh, I have social anxiety, but then she's so cute and coming out to me and talking to me and being raw with me and like willing to open up to me, I'm like, no, you don't. How come you say this? Why do you put this label on yourself? And I tell them that they're using it as a shield because they are scared of what could happen from an awkward social situation, or they don't want to be the person in the room that can't walk up to people and talk, so they're just hiding in the corner. I'm like, you're using this label as a shield, and you have got to, you're the one that controls the thoughts in your head, right? So let's control the thoughts in your head. You're not, stop giving yourself these labels. So I'm hearing a lot of things that are coming from this that it's crossing over, and I'm loving it so much. Yeah. I'm sorry. Everybody out in listener land is like, whoa, Gina, settle down, Gina. And I'm like, hee! I'm like vibrating in here. Like, I cannot wait to learn more.
Oh, you're so sweet. It is such a fun process of discovery. And again, once you have a community that is doing the same type of discovery, it's really a beautiful journey. And, whether that community be in your group of women or in your home with your spouse and your kids, I mean, the conversation just continues to bloom and to blossom. One thing that I would like to caution against is weaponizing the Enneagram. Often this is a real problem, to be honest, where people will learn a little bit about their partner's type and they'll weaponize what they know about the Enneagram through their partner, and they'll hold it against them. And that's something that I have to really caution people, because it's tempting. It's like, oh, well, you're so blah, 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 because you're so this, or, stop being such a 5 or stop being such a 6, you're worrying so much. Like they can really weaponize what they know about each other. And that's a major no-no. I mean, in the terms of accountability work, that's against everything that I teach. And in respect to the labels, I would like to say one thing about that is, one of the approaches that I have when I work with people has to do with confronting and self-confronting. And so if somebody is, let's use our children as an example. For those that have small children that have ever had a child that's afraid of the dark, often what a parent will do is they'll try to explain to the child that there's nothing to be afraid of, that everything's fine. We're going to just turn the light off. You don't need to be afraid of the dark. We're here, try and explain away the fact that the child is afraid of the dark. And what happens in scenarios like that is when the child is dismissed, they're then left with not only being afraid of the dark, but they're now afraid of being alone. They're alone in their fear of being afraid of the dark. And so an approach to that, and in respect to the Enneagram and to self-confronting some of these fears, is to befriend it. If you're afraid of the dark, I'm going to sit with you in the dark, and we're going to learn through, maybe a technical term would be exposure therapy, that the dark isn't really that scary, and I'm going to sit with you until it's not scary anymore. And then the child then learns that they're not alone, and the dark isn't actually that scary. They were able to confront their fear with an empathetic witness. And so, the Enneagram being a system that work that must be done solitarily, but also done in community, you're able to have an empathetic witness in that respect. And so, yes, as a coach and as a consultant, I'm often the role of an empathetic witness for people as they begin to do some deep self-confronting. So when people say, oh, I have social anxiety, I'm usually not going to accept those titles, and I'm going to ask them to confront it. I'm going to ask them to go put themselves in situations where they're able to confront this anxiety that they have socially. Like, we will not run from the thing that we're afraid of, but we will actually go running towards it. And when they learn their own power, when they learn their own accountability in that respect, they might not ever love social, being in the spotlight. There are certain types that don't mind it. There's types that love being the social, center of attention, so to speak. But to be able to have a nervous system that can adapt to those things is really important. So to say, oh, I have social anxiety, you're basically telling your nervous system that anytime you're in a social event that you need to be on a fight, flight, or freeze, or fawn mode. And it's like, no. We don't want a nervous system that can't adapt. We want a nervous system that can easily adapt, whether it be afraid of the dark or afraid of social situations. And then, to then embrace and befriend the fact that I don't really like social engagements, but I can do it. That is being a grown adult. That's being a mature human being. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually use the example of, because you're not going to change this person, but you might just be an uncomfortable version of yourself, right? I'm not telling you that you're going to all of a sudden be this outgoing person. Yeah, you might have to just be okay being uncomfortable, yes, being an outgoing person.
Yes.
So my example is, or my challenge for them is, every time you're in a grocery store, walk up to a stranger and compliment them. Just, excellent. One time, I mean,
Yeah.
but the more I said, I'm a ninja. I tell them I'm a ninja. And they're like, you're not a ninja, Gina. And I'm like, oh, I'm a ninja. And I'm going to start showing you that I'm a ninja. And then every day I'm posting, doing my ninja moves. And they're like, you're not a ninja, Gina. But after a while of showing you that I'm doing these things, I'm a ninja, right? Because I'm doing it. Like I've convinced you because I'm actually doing it. And now that's what I am. So you might not like doing it. You're going to have to just be okay with being uncomfortable doing it. Or being in like when I'm a dispatcher, we train for those scenarios. Officers train for these scenarios. Military train for these scenarios so that their bodies, just like you said, they respond to the scenario.
Yes.
So
Very
if
good.
I get a baby drowning in the pool, right? I don't go, oh my gosh, what I want to do, because I think of my babies and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can stop and get into character and this is what needs to happen, right? So we just train ourselves into, it doesn't mean it's a good place to be, but I can do it.
Yeah. Oh, I really like that approach a lot. In fact, I use a strategy with people where I just tell them, to work through and anticipate future disappointments and not to just make that a common thing that they do. And some types that's actually, they do too much of. Anything we do in excess of is never a good thing. But the purpose of anticipating future disappointments is exactly what you just spoke to as being a dispatcher is that your nervous system has already predicted, a future disappointment. And so whenever that environment plays out, your nervous system has already been prepared for that. And it's usually never what you've imagined it to be. But often, we're hopeful people. We want the best. And we find that we can often be easily disappointed and thrown off of our, axis, so to speak, because something didn't turn out the way that we had wanted and or hoped, or our expectations were somehow different. But if we can, simply do a little bit of grounding work every day to sort of anticipate, expect the best, absolutely manifest the best in life, live in an attitude of gratitude that vibrationally carries you through so much. But your nervous system is going to do whatever it has to do to protect itself for survival. And, each type kind of has its own little strategy for this. But globally speaking, for all 9 types, for each of us to be able to anticipate what could go wrong will help us to be neurologically flexible. And some types on the Enneagram are inflexible neurologically. They're very stuck in their way, they're stuck in their pattern. And if anything deviates from that, then their nervous systems are now dysregulated. The nervous system work within the Enneagram is really, really a fascinating study. And it explains a lot, especially when you're working with children. So for those of you that are mothers and parents, the Enneagram, when you understand your children and their type, which of course you don't ever tell your children what they are, you sort of let them come to that discovery. But if you have a general sense of the types and you can see it reflected in your children, you can watch their nervous systems respond according to their patterns. It's just so predictable. It's such a fascinating study. And, I didn't know the Enneagram when I was first parenting. I didn't learn the Enneagram till well into my mothering years. I probably had 4 children by the time I learned the Enneagram. So now that I am a master teacher of the Enneagram and I have grandchildren and I'm watching, my little grandbaby who's 10 months old right now, and I'm observing certain attributes about the way he's taking in the world. And I'm just observing in a very curious lens. It's just absolutely fascinating to watch him grow and develop and become this the essence is already there. The personality is already adapting. By the age, somewhere between 3 and 5, that personality is actually quite developed. You can really recognize it in children if you know what you're looking for. So it is so fun. It's such a beautiful thing to observe our differences and the qualities that make us unique. My youngest is 9, and it's just clear as day what his type structure is. And I can just predict what he's going to do when he's under stress. It's going to show up almost every time. And instead of that being a trigger for me, or me being upset at him because he's responding in a way that's not like me, I can just appreciate the fact that that's how he's resourcing. I can just be very curious about it, make space for it, make room for it, allow him to be fully expressed. That's one of the problems that we find in the Enneagram, and actually in all therapeutic work, counseling, therapy, anything like that, is that most people are up against this barrier of being unexpressed. And so I use the term with my clients all the time, like the real progress occurs when people can be fully expressed. So as a type A, that means you're going to be more vocal. Might express your anger in more aggressive ways, according to the world standard of what a woman should do. And so each type has a way of expressing themselves, and that is a beautiful thing to see a person become fully expressed and to really own authentically that expression of who they are.
When you get into this kind of work, that triggered for me the barrier of being unexpressed. What that triggered for me was your needs not being met. So is there a path in this that will help you uncover what those needs are? Because sometimes I think I need something. I can't really put my finger on it, but I need something, and I know it's not happening because, it's that nagging feeling that, or you're meltdown, or you're exhausted, or you're something, but something, you look around and you think everything should be fine, but something is off. Does the Enneagram, finding that in you, help you identify needs that you maybe didn't even know you had?
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's a repression that occurs in all of us, and a defense mechanism. The Enneagram, for each of the 9 types, has a specific defense mechanism associated with how they are presenting. And so when our needs aren't being met, our defense mechanisms go into full swing, and we begin to maladapt in that respect. But if we don't know what our needs are, it's sometimes very difficult to discern where this behavior is coming from. But our essence knows, our subconscious knows if a need isn't being met. And so sometimes people will just be presenting anxious, or they'll be presenting angry, or they'll be presenting resentful. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the time our ability to be fully expressed will naturally absolve the conflicts that are happening in our lives, often around our needs not being met. And so those are big clues. If you're finding yourself anxious, angry, resentful, shut down, that the first place to look is always you. I'll say it over and over again. The problem is always you. It's never the other person. It's always you. And that's a hard pill to swallow. Mm-hmm. But if you're not being fully expressed, then that bleeds into you not getting your needs met. And who's responsible for getting your needs met? You.
Amen. Mm-hmm. And I am horrible at this as well. I seem like I'm not, but I am, especially when you come up against other people with certain numbers, I guess. I don't know. The thing that I told you, the thing that made me think about it was when you were talking about being a 2 and you wanting people to read your mind, right? Like I shouldn't have to say it, but you do have to, because people can't read your mind. That's just the hard facts of life. But
totally. We bid all the time. We bid for each other's attention. We bid for each other to meet our needs. And that is sometimes really difficult when our need is met up against someone else's fear. My need to be fully expressed, my need to be seen, to be valued, to be understood might bump up against my partner's need, which is to preserve the peace and to avoid conflict. And guess what? Me being fully seen and heard might involve some conflict. So there's absolutely a discrepancy there that often is a difficult thing to negotiate within a relationship. But when you have 2 people that are mature, that are operating out of all of their qualities of their type, you can really negotiate that with a fair amount of ease. It's when we're in a defensive state and we're being confronted with something that our ego does not like, and that our shadow is defensive against, then it gets difficult. Yeah, for sure.
Oh, yeah. This is going to be fun. Rick and I are going to get into this, and this is going to be so
I can't
interesting.
wait.
This
I
is
can't wait.
going, my listeners are going to be like, oh boy, they've heard Rick on here. I don't think anybody can fully comprehend, unless you've met us in real life, what kind of a force my husband and I both are. So to have both of us in the same place, it gets loud. It gets wild, but it's going to be so interesting. I'm really excited.
Do you have a sense of what type he is?
No, I don't at all, because I don't know them enough. But when you just said that, I wrote down Rick is an 8, but with a question mark, because I don't think he's an 8. But when you said stab me in the front, he has told me, like, from day one, if you're going to cheat on me, just tell me. If you're going to cheat on me, just tell me. What a weird thing for your husband to say to you. I mean, I'm like, why would I ever cheat on you? First of all. And second of all, like, obviously I would hopefully leave before that happened, but he's just like, if you ever cheat on me, just tell me. And I'm like, you are so weird. But he wants to know. I want to know.
Yeah.
So no, I don't know what he is, but I'm really excited. I'm actually very excited to learn about my boys, because like you're talking about how they're little personalities, and we all know, mothers all know. I mean, fathers know too. We all know, but we see these little personalities. I have a 2-year-old, and he is just a lot of personality already and he doesn't even talk yet. And it's still just the things he does. I'm just like, oh my God.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. So like you're saying, to be able to understand, and I can kind of understand, like I know my oldest needs nurturing and love and snuggles and that. And my 8-year-old needs that too, but he needs, discipline's not going to work on him ever. I could beat him, scream at him, leave him in the backyard all night. I mean, he would not care. He is so resilient, he would not care. But if I do things in like the form of rewards and good jobs and praises and stuff, he just shines and he loves it, you know. So I see these things. We as mothers, we see these things. So to be able to identify it into a deeper level that's just super cool to me.
Yeah, for sure. And to see how your type rubs up against your child's. Like, how are those two, in conflict with one another? And, you'll be able to resolve conflict with your children as they get older, just knowing and appreciating the fact that they're coming about life in a different way than you. And yeah, there's just a tremendous amount of respect that can be paid towards your children being their own versions of themselves and their own human being. Yeah, it's really been a beautiful thing and very frustrating as well, to be able to see it as a parent, having had some experience as being a human a little bit longer than they have, and to see them kind of stumbling over themselves and them not being quite in a place of self-awareness where they're able to see themselves. I mean, I'm going through this with adult children right now, and they're beautiful human beings. But this work in the Enneagram is very difficult. It's not easy, and it's not as easy as just taking a test and reading a summary of your type and then on you go. I mean, you can do that, and it's useful. I think that there's benefit to that, but to really continue to do the deeper work of the Enneagram, to really observe your patterns over time, can be such a constructive thing as a human being, as a partner, as a parent, as a friend, in community, in our tribes. I mean, we talked a lot about that idea of being in a tribe, that's something that our culture and community, I think, really, really lacks. And I mean, at least from my perspective, that I believe there is a utility for that we really need to have community. And part of that begins with us having a clearer understanding of who we are, and then having the capacity to be able to see the other with compassion and empathy and with curiosity. Sometimes I think we know what somebody is and who they are and what they're motivated by. And we don't allow them to tell us who they are. And I want to see more of that in our world and in our society and culture. I want to be able to sit in a round table with people, metaphorically speaking, and ask, who are you today? what version of you has arrived? Like what has been your recent discovery? Families of origin are sort of notorious for a lack of curiosity among one another. We get into this familial structure where you're the youngest or the oldest, and you spend decades together, and now all of a sudden you're in midlife, and you think you know who we are based upon what we've known of each other. But I believe we have this innate capacity to heal ourselves and to reform ourselves and to develop and to mature. And I really have a deep desire to see that in myself and in my community, either the people that I work with or that I'm associated with, that there's a real genuine, authentic curiosity about who we are today. Who has shown up today? What can I learn about your lived experience that I don't know? That to me, there's really a beautiful gift in that.
My husband actually has really gotten, I don't know that he was good at it before, but he's gotten really good at that. He can have people hurt him and get past it and move on and say they're not the same person they were 10 years ago. They're not the same. And I'm very, very like in awe of that, because not that I'm saying once you burn me, you're gone. I'm not saying that, but I kind of am. That's a very mature, like we're talking about, that's a very mature place to be, to understand and realize and accept that people are not the same person. We can say it out loud. Obviously, we can be like, yeah, I'm not the same person. I'm not the same person I was in high school. Thank goodness. But to actually accept it as a form of, we can move on in our relationship, or even if we're not going to move on in our relationship, I can forgive you.
Yeah.
That's wow factor right there.
Yeah. A lot of that has to do with personal maturity, for sure. And then a lot of that has to do with this felt sense that we have in our body towards one another. I have recently been speaking a lot about this felt sense of belonging. People will say, oh, I really had this sense that I belonged. And the opposite can be true, and so when people apologize, when people say they're sorry, there's not a number of I'm sorry's that would ultimately earn forgiveness, but there is a felt sense that occurs when somebody is sincerely sorry. When somebody has actually done the work inside of themselves, there's almost no words. It's just a felt sense. And, the deeper work of the Enneagram really activates that presence within us that can see another person for their presence. An essence can feel an essence. And it doesn't, I think any really deep work will really get you to that place where you can feel each other instead of see each other or think each other, that we actually feel it in our bodies. We can actually feel the warmth that another person has and the kindness that another person has, and even the pain that someone is carrying. We can empathetically feel that. That is a quality of real present moment in my body presence.
And it's so needed right now. It's needed everywhere. The world is burning and it needs light. And that's what I'm trying to tell my women and any of my listeners in my community, anything, that you are put here for a reason. What is that reason? What is that purpose? You've let it get lost. You've let yourself get lost in the clutter that is our societal ideologies, our characteristics of, our whatever, the clutter of this life has put into us, and it's hidden what our true gifts and talents are. And you need to let them out and be the light that's going to shine in this world of burning blackness. No, boom, let's take that down. So bring it back up, bringing it back up. Well, I am so thankful for you for being on here with me and for our conversation that we had before this. I am so excited to work more with you. And actually I will talk to you about this later on, but I'm looking into not only, well, we'll talk about this later. Nobody else needs to know about this yet. It's a surprise. Okay. So I really thank you so much for spending your time with me, especially during the holiday season. Welcome. I'm trying to like squeeze everybody in so that we can get all of this goodness out where it needs to go.
Yeah, well, it was my pleasure. I love talking about this. It's very exciting to me to be able to share it and to have the opportunity to let people know that this is a resource to them. You know, if they have kind of hit a dead end in the modalities that they've been able to have access to, often this really is a deal breaker on all of the things that they've tried before. It can really, I believe it can be a really, really useful tool for almost everybody. So thank you for the opportunity.
I definitely agree. That's funny you said that, the dead end, because I feel like that as far as anybody who's searching for, like you said, community, anybody who's searching for a better way of doing things or self-improvement or growth, it's like you're obviously starting to look into these things because you have hit a dead end. So pivot and open the next door and see where that leads. Open the next door and see where that leads. And I'm doing it. This is my journey and I'm so excited about it. So,
well, and also just a disclaimer, it is not for everybody, Yeah. I love the Enneagram and I think it can be useful for almost anybody, but some people don't like it and for really justifiable reasons. I think the fact that it is so big and it is a kind of complex system, sometimes that's a deterrent, but if anyone obviously has questions, they can reach out and I'd be happy to help people kind of navigate and unravel some of the mystery of the lived experience. I really love doing that work. But yeah, I'm excited to work with you and to see what you discover about your type as well. That's fun.
And they can find you at Everyday Enneagram, right? Is it right. everydayenneagram.com?
Yes.
And everydayenneagram.com, you guys go check it out. It is. I saw on there. Yes, I saw on your website too that you do have kind of like a little test something link, but
yeah. I do have
at least that's a starter jumping off point.
And the link that I have is for a company called Cloverleaf, and they have multiple personality tests that you can take, which I think is actually really a beautiful thing. It kind of, I don't think the Enneagram is everything. I think it's a really important thing, and I think it's the most useful, but that's my opinion. But it does offer other personality tests and, Strength Finder and Myers-Briggs, and, there's like 16 different modalities, and then it combines all the data, which I think is fantastic, and kind of gives you a snapshot from the different tests, and, it just gives you more information about who you are. And I think all of that is useful. If it either takes you closer to the truth or further from it, that's both useful. And so, that's what I have a link to. So
another tool in our tool belts, right? They're tool belts of life. I have a tool now. This is my tool. This is my tool. It's how you use those tools.
Yeah.
You're not going to use a hammer to try to unscrew something. So, right? It's different tools for living the best life that we can.
Yeah, that's right. I love it, Gina.
Thank you, girl. I really appreciate you.
You're so welcome.